Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Cyber Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, namely me, Rory Duncan.
And me, Christina Richmond. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today.
Great. Thank you. And how are you doing, Christina?
I am well. Thank you. How are you, Rory?
Fine. On the other side of the Atlantic from you, I'm just waiting for a storm to come in and then hopefully go away again. But we're going to be battening down the hatches this evening, that's for sure. In the meantime, I thought we could maybe kick off with some news. As I was saying to you, of course, never a dull moment in the world of cybersecurity. So, hot off the presses, and thanks for this, Christina, we've just heard that the Trellix CEO Bryan Palmer has stepped down.
That is right. Yeah. Last night on LinkedIn, he made an announcement and he did step down, and we're waiting for his next exciting venture. In the meantime, Vishal Rao has been appointed CEO. Vishal Rao comes from STG, the PE firm that owns Trellix. And so it'll be interesting to watch this transition. Bryan was with Trellix for about 4 years. He led the very important sale and separation alongside STG of FireEye. And then he merged McAfee, which STG already owned, and FireEye, creating Trellix. So he's had a really pretty amazing journey, and it's been fun to watch him create a culture that was human, accessible, but also delivering some good value. So it'll be very fascinating to watch what happens next.
Yeah, it's always a shame to see somebody, that you know and admire sort of stepping away. But of course, I'm sure he'll pop up somewhere else. In the meantime, with a new CEO and so on in place. So that was that. Like, I'd literally just come in, and thanks, Christina, for forwarding that to me. There's a few other things I picked out that were of interest in the last few days. And one of the stories involves a recent outage. So that's Conduent. There was something in Bleeping Computer. They confirmed a cybersecurity incident behind the recent outage. And I think, to your point, this is a potential impact for the healthcare side of things, and particularly for the regulatory requirements, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, what was articulated in that article is that Conduent has impacted many healthcare organizations, and that it has not yet reported, at least as of this article, to the SEC. And there is this new regulatory requirement as of 2023 that Richmond Advisory Group wrote on back then, towards the end of 2023, about how there's a bigger target on the backs of CISOs now where they have to report within 4 days to the SEC any significant outage or incident that is a cybersecurity incident. And they also have to prove their governance, risk, and compliance and security program elements in that disclosure, so that the SEC is saying, we want to make sure that you're following the structure that you set forth for your organization, you're following your program, you did everything you could do to prevent this incident, and now you're reporting it within 4 days. So it also leads me to think about the Change Healthcare event that happened in 2024. And Rory, I was actually impacted by that.
Oh dear, what happened?
I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were impacted, right? So I'm not unique to that. Healthcare providers lost like $100 million a day. Hundreds of thousands of people couldn't get their claims processed. And in my case, I was trying to get a particular medication that I really needed, and it went on for 2 months of not being able to get this particular medication. So it had a very real impact on me. In fact, I even got the letter, you've been impacted by this breach. Which I used in a speech that I did last fall. I'm like, well, here I am, one of hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. impacted. Yeah, it's crazy.
We often hear about what the impacts are on things that are slightly inconvenient. We can't access Netflix for a couple of hours, or a favorite website is out of action because of a DDoS attack or whatever. But it's when something that affects something as core as healthcare and provision of medication, it has real world, real person effect. So, well, I'm sorry to hear about that. But of course, if this means that the powers that be will be tougher on the kind of actions that healthcare companies need to protect themselves, then that's a good thing, I guess.
Well, it's a tricky wicket, right? You in Edinburgh do not really struggle with the healthcare or the private healthcare situation that we have, I don't think, right? So
Yeah.
how does healthcare get impacted by you, in the UK? What happens there? Are there outages? Are there incidents, cybersecurity incidents in healthcare?
Well, kind of. The National Health Service is in such poor state at the moment that anything can set it off. The issue is, in many ways, that the UK government doesn't really have strong understanding of technology, and technology projects involving the NHS have been notoriously long, late, and inappropriate, such that by the time they're implemented, they're kind of unusable. So it's kind of an ongoing situation. I think the biggest concern from a security side with the NHS in the UK is the prospect of health data being sold, which would be being sold to, say, US firms. So they would kind of monetize the need for medication through private means. But otherwise, if you do have private healthcare in the UK here, great, you can afford it, that's really good. Otherwise, you kind of have to take what you can get.
Interesting. Yeah, it's going to be great talking with you over each of these episodes and learning how things are different for you in cybersecurity there in the UK and to the US. Because while I've covered worldwide events and have worked with a worldwide team in my past, you're the man on the ground there, and so you will have a much more rich perspective on it. I have no doubt. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, rich perspective, as in probably grumpy and cynical, but still
curmudgeonly, which is great. I mean, why not?
Yeah.
So the other news that you called my attention to, which is terrifying to me, is the ransomware delivered through Microsoft Teams.
The cold shiver went down my spine when I saw that.
Seriously, email bombing, social engineering, remote access, malware deployment. Yay, us, all through Microsoft Teams.
Yeah.
Good night.
And here's a good example of something that is endemic. Everybody uses Teams. Well, very large percentage of companies use Teams. It's kind of either bundled with the subscription or it's so cheap it kind of gets added on. And therefore, it's something we use every day. And within an organization, you assume that anybody who's listed there is going to be okay in terms of any particular threats. So to see this potentially coming in is alarming, to say the least. Whether this requires updates from Microsoft or if it's something that will require security operations team to look at, still remains to be seen. But it's another example of where some of the most easy to infiltrate systems that we commonly use are used as conduits for things like ransomware.
Absolutely. And the complexity of the attack, right? It's not just one mode of attack. It's many different multi-steps, right? And that's called out in this article. It's again, hot off the press, January 22nd in cybersecuritynews.com. And what I also took away from this article is the call out to Sophos and their MDR capabilities. They're the ones that uncovered these two distinct ransomware campaigns. And that also just makes me kind of go down the rabbit hole that we'll get to, I imagine, in another segment about acquisitions in 2024. And so, as we know, Sophos is acquiring SecureWorks, and this nods its head towards the consolidation, the maturation of the MDR, the managed detection and response market.
Yep.
We saw Trustwave bought Cyber last year. Arctic Wolf bought Cylance, right? And Sophos is buying SecureWorks. And there were others as well, but I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to talk about on the news section was, again, more of an industry-related topic, which was on energy firms. So the Insurance Business Magazine had an article just actually today saying that 2/3 or 2 out of 3 energy professionals, so those in the energy sector, report that their leadership views cybersecurity as their greatest business risk. So,
wow.
Exactly. And it's prompting a boost in cybersecurity spending and investments this year. That's according to DNV Cyber's latest energy cyber priority report. Now, here's another, piece of critical infrastructure, right? We already talked about the healthcare sector, but again, if the power station goes out, or even for a short while, we have no electricity, in many cases, we have no running water. Give it 2 or 3 days, and then the apocalypse is here. So I know it may be something that varies region by region, depending on the kind of dependencies. But what's your take on this, Christina?
Yeah, holy Snickers, right? Energy is the lifeblood for running everything that we do. I mean, you mentioned lights going out, but we're so dependent on the digital infrastructure. And of course, energy fuels our electricity that allows us to create the code as infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, all of our smart cities, every function. There was a TV show called Revolution, I think, and it had like an on-off button that was its symbol. And the premise of the show was about what if the grid went down completely forever, end of story. Planes fell out of the sky.
Yeah.
People had to learn how to communicate in the old ways. Farming became a thing individually, not just by corporations. So yes, the apocalypse would be upon us. So energy is a critical area. And I think, I don't have the data in front of me, but Rory and I do a bunch of custom work for companies where we're doing surveys. Of course, that's their data. We don't use their data for our conversations, other than to say I have seen an uptick in the energy sector. When we do these surveys, we look across a whole range of industries, and I am seeing more activity in the energy sector than I have seen in the past.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the report that we mentioned in the Insurance Business Mag does talk about specific threats that have seen a rise in the last year. One was about attacks from foreign powers, as in the kind of new methods of warfare or, state-to-state conflict. And the other one was the increasing threats specifically from cyber criminal gangs. So, this is the organized racketeering, if you like, no longer on sort of traditional industries or technologies, but in things like ransomware. So it's interesting the way that that's going. I think, we were used to seeing where cyber criminals will target individuals or will target private companies, but targeting a physical infrastructure like an energy grid is something else entirely.
Well, we are seeing the convergence of physical and digital security. And that's a whole topic for another time, right? Because that's an interesting one, and one that most cybersecurity practitioners are not as up on the side of the physical security as they are on the digital security. And we are starting to see that convergence.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Great, thanks for that, Christina. So that was the end of the news section. I thought we might talk a little bit about what's coming up at RSA this year.
Yeah, let's do. That's a good idea.
And for those of you who don't know what it is, I'm sure there's nobody. However, the RSAC 2025 is going to be held, as usual, in the Moscone Center in San Francisco. And this year it's April 28th to May the 1st. We'll both be there, which is great.
Indeed.
So, it's my first time, which I'm embarrassed to say, but Christina, you're very much a veteran.
Oh my goodness, Rory, you're a newbie, an RSA newbie. This is going to be so much fun. I think it's been about 10 years for me
Wow.
as the crow flies. And it might be longer. I think I missed 2020 and probably started around 2013. So 10 years-ish.
Okay, fine. Well, as I mentioned, we'll both be there. So for anybody listening, reach out if you'd like to meet us. We're always happy to have a chat with vendors, with service providers, and we'll be there for the entire 4 days. Yeah, the 3 main days.
It's
and then there's a
Monday to
day beforehand.
Thursday. Right, it's Monday to Thursday, but some people hang around for Friday. So we're there the 28th to the 1st or 2nd.
For me, as a newbie, I was quite taken aback. There's 417 exhibitors this year.
It's massive.
Yeah. And 52 of them are first-time exhibitors, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
Well, what I thought was interesting was that some of them are obviously new companies or small companies, but some of them just haven't exhibited there before, even though, they've been around for a long time. For me, it's always interesting coming from Europe is to see examples of companies that are exhibiting there from outside of North America. So one caught my eye, which was Strange Bee, as in strange and bee, are based in Paris. And there's something like 30 different product areas and another 10 or 15 different sub-product areas. And there's a lot of AI-related vendor exhibits as well as discussions. So, Christina, as the experienced conference goer, what do you think is going to be some of the highlights for RSAC? Maybe some examples of emerging technology. What about AI and so on?
Yeah, and before I jump into that, Rory, I just want to say that beyond the 417 exhibitors, there are so many companies that come and do not exhibit, and they have hotel suites. And so what I love about going to RSA is that it is an outdoor experience as much as it is an indoor experience. And so I find I'm running from hotel to hotel to hotel, back to the Moscone, back to a hotel, and having, conversations in many different locations. So as opposed to at Black Hat in the US, we're indoors the entire time. At the RSAC at Moscone, it's so much outdoor time. So you get a lot of fresh air and you put in your steps. So I just wanted to say that.
But
good. Yeah, and we'll get lots of exercise. We won't be just sitting in a dark room.
Well, I mean, that's good to hear. But of course, we'll already have plenty of pressure, given that we'll be living in a cardboard box in the car park outside. Probably, given
I hope not.
Well, given the availability and price of the accommodation at that time. But again, for those of you who have been, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. For those who haven't, the price and availability for hotel rooms around the Moscone Centre is quite breathtaking.
It's insane. And if you haven't booked your hotel yet, if you're a newbie to RSA, I know it's January, book your hotel, because the prices that are currently $400 to $700 a night US dollar are going to double and triple by April. So book your hotel sooner rather than later.
And that $400 will get you a decent sized dumpster at the back of the Denny's. So build that into your budgeting.
That's right. So I have seen it all at RSA, and I'm sure everyone who's listening who has been to RSA will nod when I say some of these things in the past. The belief from a company, one of the first EDR providers, Cylance, back in 2017 was prevention is the only thing you need, and they were talking about their EDR capabilities and that you didn't need to really protect anymore. You didn't need to respond as, obviously EDR is about response, but it was more about its prevention by having their tool. So those were the banners all over San Francisco back in 2017. I have seen RSA before that where it was threat intelligence, and there were threat intelligence platforms everywhere on the show floor. So tips. And gosh, that was probably 2013 that I saw that. this year, it's going to all be AI and AI security. It's going to be about we help you detect in real time. We help you integrate and correlate your threat intelligence in real time. We do a better job of reducing your alerts in real time. And, I'm repeating real time, but nothing is really real time. It's going to be a heck of a lot closer to real time using AI. But gosh, let's be honest here. We've been using ML, essentially AI, for at least the last decade and longer. But this year's marketing is going to be AI security. How do we do this differently? And how are we better at this? And so I would caution our listeners to have a healthy dose of suspicion and skepticism and caution, right? Because everybody's going to put .ai on their company name, and everybody's going to say we use AI. So number one, be skeptical. Number two, is it just ML, or are they starting to bring in Gen AI to their capabilities? And number three, where is agentic AI in this conversation? Because while agentic AI may not be the focus this year, it might be, but if it's not, I predict 12 to 18 months, agentic AI capabilities are going to be really a big thing. So anyway, that's my sort of takeaway, that the theme is going to be AI, AI, AI.
Yeah, I think you're right, Christina. There's certainly plenty of examples where existing companies, but also many of the first-time exhibitors are talking about that. It's either a solution or a platform or a wrapper of some kind that is going around.
So at RSA, one thing to mention here, Rory, is that we're going to be talking about RSA every week on our Tuesday podcast.
Yeah.
And we will be looking at who's going to be there and who we're going to be meeting with and giving little snippets about who they are and what they do. And then as we get through RSA, we will be summing up what we learned and how the show went. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a good reminder just to ask folk listening to this who they might want to hear about. Is there somebody you'd like us to go and see? Is there a particular technology or company you'd like some more information about?
Yeah, that's a great idea. And the other thing to point out is that I think we're going to do some video podcast there. Are we not?
Yes, we are. I shall be there with my trusty Sony camera and my tripod, and we'll be wandering around the floor asking people random questions and trying to not drink beer while doing that. I shall...
Or whiskey.
Oh, yeah, there is a whiskey tasting, apparently, I've heard.
Oh, lovely. Yes, there is.
So, Christina, normally we would have at this point a featured guest or some other particular topic we'd talk about, but given that this is the first episode, and given that we are in 2025 now, in fact, almost coming to the end of January in 2025, I figured we might perhaps look a little bit at some of the M&A activity that happened
that's a great idea.
Last year, and then see what we thought about it as a kind of a way to round out this particular episode, if that's okay.
No, it sounds terrific.
Fine. So one of the things I think certainly I'd been reading about is that we had a relatively quiet 2023 when it came to M&A activity. Now, I say relatively speaking because, of course, if you compare it to some more mature industries, the cybersecurity industry is never a dull moment, as we mentioned earlier in the program, but certainly things ramped up in 2024. And for me, the most interesting acquisition was Thoma Bravo's acquisition of UK-based Darktrace.
Right.
I think that went through in October 2024. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I thought that's really quite significant was, well, apart from the fact that they tried before and it didn't happen, but partly it was the fact that it was a cybersecurity AI company, right? So very firmly in that side of things, which back in 2022 perhaps was less of a big deal than it is now. But perhaps the second point, which is related to the first, is the fact that it was a $5.3 billion deal, which is huge. And I think there's no getting away with the fact that because this is a cybersecurity AI firm with its, ability to look at how to tackle very advanced cyber threats and auto detection and all these kind of things, it probably points to the reason why it's such a large amount of money. But certainly that was the one that stood out for me during the year.
Well, that is massive, right? I mean, it's a huge acquisition on any scale, right? But for Europe especially, right? I think it is massive. But it signals for me that we've come out of the COVID years. We've come out of the slow VC and PE and acquisition several years in cybersecurity. And things are starting to ramp back up again. Now, I am hearing that the valuations are not back to the same level that they were at several years ago in cybersecurity, but gosh, 5 to 10x is still quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
It's still a huge amount of money. So that was one really large acquisition. But when you start totaling some of the other acquisitions, like TrustWave acquired Cyber, I think it was $850 million. The funding came from investors SoftBank and Google. Cyber wanted to go public. They were valued at like $5 billion several years ago. And so interesting that they snapped that up for a song, and I'm putting that in air quotes, right? That TrustWave got Cyber, and I expect to see that really make a difference in their MDR portfolio. There was a lot of activity in MDR, wasn't there? This year.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. So along those lines, Sophos, a similar dollar amount. Sophos announced its intention of acquiring SecureWorks for $859. So that's another one that's, in that same range. And then Arctic Wolf bought Cylance. And that one was a surprise to me. I mean, the Cyber looked like, okay, they've been trying to be acquired for a while. SecureWorks was on the market for a while. Cylance had found a home in BlackBerry. We wrote a blog on it, didn't we? And we actually stated our opinions on it quite directly.
Yes, and that just to say for those listening, go to richmondadvisorygroup.com/blogs, where you will find the analysis. But apart from shameless plugs aside, that was a bit of a surprise and obviously had quite significant implications. But feel free, listeners, to go and check that out, and please comment on that if you like. And that was in November, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's just towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
And that was a big surprise for me because, sadly, I thought that Cylance had been absorbed into BlackBerry in a way that sort of caused the technology to go off to a quiet corner and not be heard from again. And so I was really happy that Arctic Wolf pulled Cylance technology out of the cobwebs and is dusting it off and investing in the engineering to really bolster their MDR capabilities with this EDR legacy giant. I mean, Cylance was one of the first EDR providers out there.
Yeah, exactly. So we did a fairly detailed piece of analysis on that. But let's see what happens. As we know, and I think that was one of our points, any large purchase takes a while to integrate.
That's right.
When an acquisition happens, it's not just about, you bought it, right, fine, carry on. There are the people, there's the technologies, there's integration, there's strategy. There's all those kind of things.
Yeah, along those lines, Rory, you bring up a really good point. And, we've been looking a lot at the CTEM market in the last several months, the continuous threat exposure management market. And we've actually come up with our own acronym on it, haven't we?
No, I was about to say, I hope you wouldn't ask me because I can't remember what it was.
Here's the new acronym that we've come up with. Thank you, Gartner, for CTEM, but we've come up with VEMS, Vulnerability Exposure Management Solutions.
Or was it services?
services. Vulnerability. See, we have to get our arms around that. But at any rate, in the VEMS market, in the vulnerability exposure management services market, we saw Noetic being acquired by Rapid7, and Hubble was acquired by NetSpy. And, you brought up the point about integration and engineering. And I must say, from our conversations with both Rapid7 and NetSpy, it does seem they're really pushing hard and fast to get both of their acquisitions integrated, part of their platform and overall services quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I suppose the quicker the better, really, because then they can then focus on organic growth on top of the purchase, looking at getting new clients and so on. And the longer that takes for that integration to happen, then the momentum suddenly stops. But I think one of us made the point that sometimes you have to be quite careful with how it's done. If it's integrated too quickly, you don't really carry the people along with you. You have to have, the buy-in and involvement of particularly those staff members that you've acquired through acquiring the company.
That's right. And in the MDR space, back to that for a moment, it's really critical that Arctic Wolf is dusting off the Cylance technology. Really what's important in that is that it is not easy to maintain endpoint technology. And you really do have to have the right engineering. You really do have to invest in it from an R&D perspective. And so proof will be in the pudding for Arctic Wolf, but I would hope and make the assumption that in deciding to acquire Cylance, that they knew this going in and that they have made a significant investment in their engineering capabilities. But again, we'll see as it unfolds.
Yeah, indeed. And, that was something to kind of finish the year off from an M&A perspective, but it certainly wasn't insignificant in that way. Well, Christina, I think we've been talking for like 2.5 hours, so I need to we need to wrap this up here on the first episode of Cyber Sidekicks. So everybody who's been listening, thank you very much for joining us. Keep tuning in every Tuesday through your favorite streaming platform to hear the latest episode. Feel free to add some comments, to send us your thoughts.
And don't forget that we hope to see you at RSA, and please do let us know if you're going. We'd love to have a chat, and we'll be having some interesting conversations on the show floor.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Christina. That's great. And with that, thank you for listening, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.